kind of flowing. And then I'll do a legit hello. But this sauce we've used to spark over 350,000 relationships around the dinner table. In the last 3.5 years, asking this question around the dinner table, we've seen a lot of people open up and share great stories of fear, of overcoming fear and liberation and forgiveness and regret and shame and all those kind of good things. And at the beginning of 2019, we took a look at the pasta sauce and that question about gratitude and said, why haven't we written down any of the answers? We've asked a lot of people this question. And so that's what launched this study to uncover who do people talk about in their lives from their past that helped them get to where they are today. Because as Steve Jobs mentioned, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. And so that's why we're, so jazzed up to have you as our 1,000th interview.
I love that milestone. I love your forum of eating. I mentioned to you, I lived in Italy for a couple of years, and that's really where I developed my love of food. In North America, we're very transactional when it comes to food. It's fast food. We invented fast food, which I think is a tremendous disservice.
Good job, America.
Yeah. It was in Italy where you'd sit down to a meal, and it would be 4 or 5 courses. I have to tell you a funny story. So the reason I was in Italy is I was a missionary for my church.
Mm-hmm.
So in my church, you volunteer, and they send you anywhere in the world. And you open this letter, and it tells you where you're going to spend the next 2 years of your life. And I always tell people, when you look at that letter and it says you're going to spend 2 years in southern Italy, that's when you know Jesus loves you. And so my first exposure was I had dinner. It was right around Christmas time with La Familia Ianieriello. And it was this big Christmas feast, and it was 7 courses, and it was amazing. So we started to talk about, in Italian, brother is fratello. So fratello Ianieriello. And they said, fratello Ianieriello was a very important man in the Navy. And I said, oh, really? He said, yeah. I said, was he a captain of the ship? I said, oh, no, more important than that. Oh, I said, was he an admiral? And they said, no, he was the cook.
Pronounce that one more time. Fratello
Ianieriello.
Ianieriello.
Yeah.
My grandfather was a cook in the U.S. Navy.
There you go.
On the USS Acushnet. And I use his ice cream spade at every dinner.
Isn't that a nice connection?
I never made that. That he was a cook in the U.S. Navy. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, and I'll tell you what I love about. I think there's something very spiritual about breaking bread with people.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a breakfast this morning with a delightful woman from Singapore. She's Singapore Health and the Communication, and they want to develop this joy in work, not joy at work, joy in work. And we were talking about, she went on this retreat where it was a retreat around gratitude. And she said at every meal, we gave thanks. Now, she says, I'm not Christian or even particularly spiritual. The whole purpose of it was to look at your food and say, think of how many people's work went into delivering this meal to you, and shouldn't you be grateful? And don't do anything in your meal or in your conversation that would disrespect the labor and the sacrifice that brought that food to your plate. And I thought, that is beautiful. And then I come right from that to you and your pasta sauce. And I'm thinking, what a wonderful spiritual thread.
Well, just to end this thread before we dive into the podcast, do you know what the Latin origination of the word company is? The Latin root of company?
I don't.
Companis. Break up that word. Com means together. Panis means bread.
Bread. Yeah. Come together over bread.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I really do. I think, we talk about, you say, well, let's break bread. Well, that's very intimate. When you invite someone into your home to eat, that's a very intimate experience. And it shows that you trust them.
Yeah.
You're bringing them into your home, which is a big step in a relationship. And then what is the conversation? I love that. So thank you.
Well, we're going to dive into that conversation now. I'm going to hit the clap to officially connect us. Oh, perfect.
Keep us on track.
Well, hey, folks, and welcome back to the 747 Conversations podcast. It's your host, Chris Shembra, with Mr. Chester Elton here in beautiful New York City. This is the 1,000th interview, and
Thank you.
I couldn't be more honored to have you. Folks, Chester is the founder and CEO of a wonderful company named CultureWorks. He's a 5-time New York Times best-selling author of 11 different books, most notably The Carrot Principle, All In. He sold 1.6 million copies of his books, translated into 30 languages across the world. Marshall Goldsmith's M100 program, one of the top leadership thinkers in the world. His company helps the biggest organizations engage their employees, leadership development. We're going to have one heck of a good conversation.
I'm looking forward to it.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted. I'm honored to be your 1,000th guest.
1,000 in 5 months. We couldn't have planned this better. You are the king of appreciation by, I believe, the Minister of Canada and so many things. And the simple question I have to start us off with today: if you could give credit or thanks to one person in your life that you don't give enough credit or thanks to, or that you've just never thought to give any credit or thanks to, whether it's someone you've never met before or someone you've known your entire life, who would that be?
I've been pondering this question all day because I knew it was coming, right? And it's interesting. I grew up in a household full of gratitude. My father was an amazing man in that he made everybody in the room feel good about themselves. And so I grew up giving thanks and giving gratitude. And so when people say, who are you grateful for? It's very easy for me to go to my father, who taught us that, be good to everybody. Everybody's having a tough day. Be kind. And I love those words. So I was going down the list and I thought, okay, I'm grateful for my father. I'm grateful for my wife and my business partners and my teachers and my coaches and so on. The part of the question that made me really ponder was that I probably haven't given enough gratitude towards. And as I thought about it, I thought it's probably my son Carter. And it's not that Carter and I don't have a great relationship. We do. And it's not that Carter doesn't think that I love him and adore him, because I do. He's actually the father of my 2 grandchildren. And so he brings a lot of joy into my life. The thing that I probably don't give Carter enough credit for is Carter growing up went through a really tough time. Just with himself and battling with various issues that he had. And I don't think I've ever thanked him enough for the lessons that taught me to become not just a better father, which certainly it did, because it upended everything in our lives. It really just taught me to be a better person and a better man because of the struggles we went through. And I don't know that I've ever sat him down and thanked him specifically for that. So thank you for bringing that to my conscious.
If you don't mind me asking a follow-up question about him, the struggles that he went through in life, were they things he was born with and just didn't know life before that? Are they things that happened kind of within childhood? Did he have to react to news of something that he was going through? What did that look like?
Excellent question. It wasn't anything that was a traumatic event, or it wasn't a sudden realization or anything like that. He just battled with social anxieties and depression and feelings of self-worth. And it was just really a difficult time. And it kicked in right before he went into high school. And so we spent a lot of time. I always tell him, I said, Carter, we spent a lot of time and treasure trying to get this right. And so we were clearly in over our heads in dealing with that. In my generation, the way we dealt with depression was, hey, buck up. Hey, cheer up. Put a smile on that face. Turn that frown upside down. And so we didn't embrace counseling. We didn't embrace therapy. And so that was the toughest part for me, because in my generation, those were signs of weakness. And I didn't want my son to be weak. And so as we battled through that and finally found some great counselors and some great schools that we actually sent him to, where he could have that 24/7 kind of encouragement, where he made some really interesting and deep, found some deep relationships and brought our family through that, that we really grew and gave me a greater understanding that, look, there are some things where just, slapping a smile on it doesn't solve the problem, whether it was through getting the right medication or getting the right counselor or getting him the right situation. And it turned into and it was a long journey. It wasn't 6 months or a year. It was years. In fact, we still are very careful to make sure we follow the plan. And he's grown into just this remarkable husband and father. And I see him with my little granddaughter who was born in January, Clara.
Congrats.
And he is just so kind and so loving and so aware. And that journey, I think, took us all there, and me in particular.
I imagine that when a father is, finally gets over that age-old association between therapy and weakness, and, he as a son inherits some of that, and he looks at therapy and says, no, that my dad's always said that that's weakness. I can't go there. But then you flip the switch, and you understand that therapy is vulnerability, and vulnerability is strength. How do you get through that as a family?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because we talked a lot as a family. And as you might guess, when you have a child in crisis, it brings the whole family in crisis. And you're spending an inordinate amount of time on one child. And so you have to be very careful that the other children don't feel dismissed or marginalized. And so to get the family to buy in, that say, hey, look, we're all in this, for Carter was again, a wonderful part of the journey. That they didn't feel left out, and they felt like they could be a help and be part of that, I think was really great. And by the way, I have to give total credit. This is making it sound like I had this great awakening and so on, and that was part of it. It was my wife that brought me along, without a question. My father would always laugh. He said, Chester, you and I have a lot of things in common. The best one is we both married above our station, And so it's my wife Heidi that really stepped back and said, Chester, look, we've got to just really dig in and make this happen. We can't just expect him to pull through. Pull yourself up. And she did a lot of the research and put a lot of things together and really pulled me aside on many occasions and said, look, we've tried tough love, right? We've tried all these different things that we just had heard about. Now it's time to really get help. Let's talk to people, talk to friends, talk to counselors, and get him in a position where he can blossom, and he has.
And you said you've learned a lot from him, watching the way he's dealt with adversity and things in his life. What are some of those things that you've learned from him that have then gone on and had a positive impact on others through your teachings?
Well, you mentioned it earlier, being vulnerable. So it's interesting. You mentioned I'm part of the Marshall Goldsmith 100. I've started to do executive coaching. And that's another transformative moment, right? Is that it used to be if you got an executive coach,
you were weak.
That was right. That was like the last hope to save your career is you're going to get a coach, right? And now it's seen as an investment in you as a leader. I'm coaching some high potential leaders at American Express, and the fact that they have a coach, now they are the envy of everyone else, in their group. So that ability to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to be coachable. I think and I've never thought of it this way, so thank you, is that journey that I took with Carter to be able to ask for help, to be coachable, to say, where are my shortcomings? What are some tools? What are some things I can do to be a better leader? And it's never lost on me, becoming a better leader makes you a better person, right? And we deal a lot in data. You mentioned all our research and so on.
870,000 individuals he's interviewed for his research.
Well, that's through surveys and whatnot.
I
haven't sat down with one-on-one with 850,000 people. And we've got these online motivators assessments that we found to be really revealing for folks. Is that, to be coachable, to be vulnerable, to be able to take advice without offense and move through, that I really attribute to Marshall. I went through his coaching. I actually had a coach that took me through his whole process. And it was wonderful when you have stakeholders, where you ask them very carefully, how did I do over the last 30 days? What can I do to improve over the next 30 days? And no matter what they tell you, there's only one right answer. And the answer is thank you. You don't defend. You don't litigate. Well, I think you could do better here. Well, let me tell you why I wasn't better there. Because of this, right? You just take the advice, you take the coaching, the feed forward, and you say, thank you for that.
Question, if you had to ask Carter about your parenting style or the way that you helped him through his challenges, and you had to ask for that, not 30-day, but 30-year feedback.
Yeah.
What do you think he'd say?
Well, I mean, Carter's very gracious. And, and Father's Day, we just went through that. And he's always very gracious. I remember I took advice of a friend of mine. He says, send a text to all your kids and say, you know how much I love you. Give me a couple of ways how I can be a better father, which is a great question to ask your kids. And Carter came back and said, Dad, you're the greatest dad anybody could ever have. And he's very gracious that way. And in the moment, I know he believes that. There was a time when I'm sure he did not believe that, because there was that friction as we went through. And we both had to find, we are very, very different people, Carter and I. And yet we have that common DNA and common family tradition. We think of things very differently. And it was, and part of our journey was we had to understand how to communicate with each other, how it would be meaningful. And you know what it was? I think it would be interesting to ask Carter this. I think it was when I literally just spent time with Carter, just uninterrupted time. Because there were times where he would crash and I would stop everything and I'd just go and I would just spend the day with him. And we'd walk and we'd talk and we'd do whatever. I have to tell you a really interesting moment. So he was at this school, and we'd send him to get help and everything. And it was going well, not as well as maybe we'd hoped. And we were kind of at that inflection point. And I remember sitting down with him and saying, Carter, I like your therapists here, your coaches, your teachers, and I know you've got a great relationship with them. I said, you need to understand something, is that I'm sure they do care about you. As soon as the check doesn't clear, they just don't care as much. They're paid to do that. Now, I'm not saying that they don't care. It's just that you can understand, this is a business for them as well as their calling. So there's a difference between your therapist and family. I said, blood is there always. And I said, for example, if you were really in trouble and you needed somebody right away, you could call your Uncle Byron, who lives in California, and you could say, Uncle Byron, I need help. He would be on the next plane because he's blood. And he doesn't get paid for that, and it's not part of his revenue streams, right? I said, so understand, embrace this while you're here. Understand, this will come to an end, and these people will fade. Family never fades. And he said, really? I said, absolutely. He said, so if I needed you and I called you, you'd get on the next plane. I said, absolutely. I said, oh. 2-3 weeks later, I get a call. He says, Dad, I need to see you. I said, really, what's up? He goes, I just really need to see you. Will you come? I said, yep. So, we had to do a couple of things. 2 days later, I sit down with him. We're at the place. I sit down on the couch. I go, buddy, what's up? He goes, just wanted to see if you'd show up. Isn't that interesting? And I remember we had that moment. I said, buddy, every time. He said, great. That was it. Isn't that an incredible moment?
That's a beautiful, beautiful moment.
And see, what was great about it is I wasn't angry with him. Like, are you kidding me? You called me away from work for this? Just to see if, of course I'm going to, it was kind of like, absolutely. And that was the softening of me to say, well, great. Well, now you know.
So it's interesting, on the flip side of that situation, your job is to go into huge organizations and essentially help them create the comfort of family with each other, even though there's that transactional barrier. They're just hired individuals. How do you, metaphorically speaking, create that sense of trust that you and Carter just shared in that moment? How do you create that within an organization? How do you create that family style feel?
Another really insightful question. Because it depends on the organization and it depends on the leader. One of the quotes that I've come across recently that I really love is, I'm a big sports fan, right? And John Wooden, long-suffering Mets and Jets fan. We'll get to that later. Is John Wooden, who was the was the thank you ESPN, but behind the camera, right? John Wooden, the legendary UCLA basketball coach, 10 championships and so on. He had a great saying I came across really recently, and he says, we're going to treat everybody fairly and differently. And I think so often as leaders we think fairness means sameness. And it's not. So when we go into an organization, you say, how do we create that? You really got to do your homework. Is what are the areas and what is the culture? And, it starts with the leader. It always does, right? Whether you're Marshall Goldsmith coaching somebody or whatever. Because the way the leader acts, the way the leader behaves, gives permission for everyone else to act the same way. You say, what's the quickest way to change a culture? Well, change the leader. You know this in sports, right? You don't fire all the players. You fire the manager.
Yeah.
And the greatest example of that was the Boston Red Sox. Remember, they went from worst to first, basically with the same players.
Yeah.
All they changed was the manager, for the most part. I mean, there were a couple of tweaks. And I thought, wow, you see, that's permission. So if you've got a toxic culture, there's no doubt in my mind you have a toxic leader. Now, if you have a toxic leader that's coachable, which, by the way, is very rare, right? Like people come up to me, I speak at a lot of conferences, they'll say, you got to talk to my CEO. We have a toxic culture. I said, your CEO will never talk to me. I said, why? He said, because culture doesn't matter. You want to know why you have a toxic culture? It's your leader, right? It's all about the paycheck. It's all about fear. It's all about burn and churn. That guy's not talking to me. I'm going to say, hey, everybody matters. He goes, no, they don't. Right? And so there's no way to break through that. Where you can affect real change is where you've got people that have a good culture. They're good people, and they want to become better. And they maybe have some blind spots. The way you do it more than anything is you do it through leading with gratitude.
Ooh, we're about to get good.
And by the way, our 11th book is called Leading with Gratitude.
Let's dive into that.
Yeah. In fact, I brought you a printout. We just finalized the cover literally 2 days ago. I'll show it to you.
I know how passionate Christy is about her covers.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We went the rounds with this. Harper Collins businesses are public, and they were wonderful and patient because we wanted to get the cover right. I say, do you judge a book by the cover?
Yes.
Absolutely you do. It makes all the difference, right? And what we looked at, and we divided the study up into 3 parts. One was the myths around leading with gratitude, that it's weakness, right? That fear is the best motivator, that it's all transactional, it's about the paycheck, right? If I'm not the smartest guy in the room and I give too much credit, that's a sign of weakness, which, you and I would say, well, that's ridiculous. The fact is, in most leadership principles, those are very prevalent. So then we talk about the 8, steps or best practices in great leaders, and we won't go into all 8. One of my favorites is assume positive intent. That leaders that lead with gratitude assume positive intent. In other words, I honestly believe that most people show up to work to do a good job. It's the rare person that says, you know what, today I am going to screw up as much as humanly possible. I'm going to piss off as many customers as I can. That's my goal. And I'm convinced if I really work at it, I can achieve that goal, by noon. Most people are trying their best, and they make mistakes along the way. Well, if you lead with gratitude and you lead with the fact, look, I'm really appreciative of the fact that you come to work hard every day and that you're going to make mistakes. Now it's just about fixing the mistake and coaching you up to make sure it doesn't happen again. As opposed to, well, how stupid could you be? You went through the training. Are you kidding me? You did that? See what I mean? It changes the whole dynamic. Now, one brings a person along and develops them as a future leader. The other crushes their spirit and encourages them to find a job somewhere else. So I love this assume positive intent. And the leaders we looked at were amazing. One of my favorites, who actually isn't in the book, is a guy named Scott O'Neill. You'd love Scott. He's the CEO of the New Jersey Devils and the Philadelphia 76ers. If you love hockey, we got to go.
Heck yes. Heck yes.
I'm Canadian. It's not a religion. It's not life or death for Canadians. It's way more important than that. You know what I'm saying? And that's the way he leads. And he brings together amazing teams that are amazingly engaged and productive very quickly, because they know how much he appreciates them working hard every day. And he does a lot of things to let them know. And so it's amazing. So, and then the third part of the book, which we didn't think was going to be a big part of the book, and it's turned out to be probably the most important part, is take it home. So we've got all this data to say this will create a really healthy culture, an engaged culture. It'll help you lead with gratitude. Don't leave it at work. Take it home, you know, and value and be grateful for the people that are most important to you.
Now, the interesting thing is, you know, the listeners or the viewers who are watching this could sit here and say, well, I know as many big tycoon CEOs that suck at gratitude as I know great CEOs that are great at gratitude. They both make the same amount of money. What's the difference? How do you prove that it's better doing it this way? What are those metrics?
Well, I mean, if money is your only matrix, yeah. If money is your only matrix, you say, well, you know, that guy's a son of a bitch, and look how well he did, you know. So I'm going to be that. So great. That's a path you can choose. To me, it's about legacy. It's about legacy. What do you want to be remembered for? The guy that made a lot of money? You know, I love Stephen Covey's quote. He says, you know, I never met anybody on their deathbed who said, geez, I wish I'd spent more time at work. Right? So what kind of a legacy do you want to leave? Do you want to leave a legacy of good works and goodness that brought people along, that created a legacy that rippled through the ages? Or do you want to be that jerk that, you know, that, yeah, he made a lot of money and crushed a lot of people along the way? Great. Sure. I mean, those are paths you can choose. No doubt about it. Me, I would choose the other.
There's a wonderful, I believe, TED Talk or a book of a man who argues that you shouldn't live for your resume, you should live for your legacy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, seriously, do I want Carter to remember me as a 5-time New York Times bestselling author? No, not even close. I mean, I would hope he'd remember that. That was hard, right, to get there. I want him to remember me as when he called, I showed up. You know, when he had a hard time, I spent the day with him. That's what I want my kids to remember. Yeah, was I successful in business? Yeah, that was nice. What's the legacy? What do I want my grandchildren to remember? You know.
If Carter could come in and teach a class to the people that you work alongside of every day, and you knew that his kids would watch him teach that class, what would you have him teach?
Well, I that's an easy one, actually. Just be kind. I'd have him teach kindness. You know, the one great thing about Carter, even when he was little, is he was just a kind child. Like when we were at church or anything, if there was a kid that was being picked on, it was Carter that went over and comforted them. You know, Carter just has that heart. And so there's no doubt in my mind that if Carter were to teach a class on culture, it would be about kindness and gratitude. If you could see him with his kids, he is so much better father than I am, than I ever was, right? Because he's just so patient and just so kind. And see, that's the legacy you want. Yeah, I could have beaten the crap out of Carter and made Carter a mean, aggressive, and somewhat successful person by the world standards, by business standards. But would you be proud of that? No.
If Carter was sitting on this couch right now, what would you say to him?
Well, just I love you. I tell him that all the time. We have a fun thing. Carter's inherited his father's hairline.
Uh-oh.
Which I'm not sure he's thrilled about. Anyway, it's really funny whenever he comes over. When they were little kids, we used to give each other bonks. You know, he said, give me a bonk, you know, and we'd laugh. And that was kind of our little I love you, right? And so we still do that. If he was on the couch, we'd just grab him, we'd just give each other a bonk. It would be great.
It's the Marshall Goldsmith hairline, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Great leadership thinkers.
Yeah. Well, you know what they say? They say that if you have a receding hairline, you're considered a great thinker. And if you're balding on top, you're considered a great lover. Did you know that? And if you have both, you just think you're a great lover.
Well, Mr. Chester, it has been quite a wonderful conversation.
It's been delightful.
Do you have any last words in closing for our viewers?
Sure. I always like to tell the story of my dad. I think of I have four older brothers, and we all love each other. We all have great families. And when we get together, we talk about what were the greatest lessons Dad taught us. And to give you a little backdrop, my dad was in radio. So I love putting this. It reminds me of my dad, right? We grew up in radio stations. He was an on-air talent, and then he went into management, and he was the music man in the community, plays and whatnot. I never heard my father ever raise his voice or criticize my mother. Isn't that interesting? They were married for 65 years. It was one of the great love stories of all time. So when we get together as brothers, we say, what are the great lessons Dad taught us? And it's really interesting. A person says that he taught us how to love our wives. And I've never raised my voice to my wife. We've never had a heated argument. And I've never said anything that wouldn't be anything but complimentary about my lovely wife, Heidi. So that I think is just a great lesson. Then I had an experience with him that I often use when I speak. My dad was a great athlete, and we played tennis. That was our sport. We were a tennis family. And so as I grew up and I got good enough to play Dad, we would, in Vancouver, we would play tennis Saturday mornings, go get a McMuffin at McDonald's, right? And then we'd go to the Army and Navy and look for bargains. It was this, 10 cents on the dollar bankruptcy thing, and he loved a bargain, right? So I'll never forget, beautiful day in Vancouver. We're going to the Army and Navy. We'd play tennis, had our McMuffins, and we had to go by Pigeon Park. So it's the Army and Navy where you could go, right? And it's still there, and it's in a kind of a sketchy part of Vancouver called Gastown. So we were coming by Pigeon Park where the homeless people live. And there's this homeless lady coming across the street with everything she owned in a brown paper sack. And it burst open and spilled on the sidewalk right before she got in the park. Now, not anything you and I'd want to own, everything she owned. And normally, and you see this in New York a lot, right? You just give them a wide berth, keep nothing to see here, folks, right? And that's what everybody did. And that's what I was about to do. Except my dad immediately went up to her and knelt down, gathered up her stuff, was talking to her, said something, made her laugh, and got her safely in the park. And I remember watching this, and he came back to me, and I was at 12, 14 years old at the time, right? And I said, Dad, you shouldn't touch those people. They're not clean. And he told me this, and I've never forgotten it. He said, Chess, you be good to everybody. Everybody's having a tough day. Everybody's having a tough day. And so he said, you'll encounter people, and he said, oh, that guy's driving a Bugatti or a Bentley, or look at the fine clothes. And he said, I got news for you. You don't trade places with anybody. Everybody's got stuff. So whenever you meet them, you don't know what they just came from. You don't know if they're having trouble with a kid, they've got bad news, backed over his cat. You just don't know. So you be sure to be good to everybody. And my dad was. He talked to the homeless people and the parking attendants the same ways he did the captains of industry. And I think that has fueled all the work I've done in writing and coaching and so on was that example, just to be kind to everybody. Isn't that a wonderful legacy? And that's my dad.
Which is interesting because that's what you'd have your son teach. That legacy lives on. Your dad's legacy lives on straight through his great-grandchildren.
That's the hope.
I like it. What was your dad's name?
John Dalton Elton.
John Dalton Elton.
He went by Dalt.
Adult. I love it. Well, Chester, thank you for being with us here today.
You bet.
Folks, I mean, I don't know what to say after that. It's what an honor it is to close our 1,000th interview with a man who's wearing my favorite color.
There you go. The
Orange.
color of optimism, by the way.
Is it?
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's technically it's the color of the Clemson Tigers of my home state, even though I was a South Carolina Gamecock, and so I shouldn't be liking orange. But to close this chapter or to continue this chapter of our life, interviewing so many great people around gratitude and the core hypothesis that giving gratitude to others is good for business. It's proof right here, folks. And I hope you learned as much today as I did. Chester's got an amazing book coming out called Leading with Gratitude. And I hope you go out and purchase this book. big organizations, small organizations. If you need help with leadership development, employee engagement, executive coaching, this is your guy. My new favorite, one of my favorite guys in the world, and I couldn't be more pleased. So if you like this, if you like this episode, please subscribe on iTunes and Spotify. Share it with your friend. I hope y'all are having a phenomenal day on Earth. Remember, folks, it's your world. Go explore, and we'll see you soon.
Hey, and I want to take 30 more seconds.
Yes.
Because, in our business, when somebody does a great job and they go above and beyond, the reason we wear orange is because we wrote a book called The Carrot Principle.
Yep.
And so we present carrots.
Oh, my gosh.
To those people that do a great job. So you've got your own carrot, man.
Oh, my gosh. TheCultureWorks.com. Check out ChesterElton.com and TheCultureWorks.com. I mean, since it is my 1,000th, interview, I might as well, ask, what have you reacted to the most in, kind of what we're up to with this question and the impact that this question can have?
Yeah, I think it's such an insightful question because it doesn't ask, who are you most grateful for in your life? It asks, who are you most grateful for that you probably haven't given enough credit to? That's the magic of this question. And for me, it was very emotional for me today as I kind of came to that conclusion. Because, there are episodes in your life where you've learned a lot that you don't necessarily want to talk about a lot. It's very personal. So it's been remarkable in this conversation how you've brought out so many emotional connections for me today around someone who's so near and dear to me, my son, my oldest son, and so I think that great leaders reflect. They take time to reflect, and we don't always take time to reflect on the right things. We tend to reflect on transactional things. So I love this reflective question on deeply personal things. I think it adds a richness to the conversation.
Steve Jobs once said, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards.
Looking backwards, yeah.
And, our core idea, we asked this question mainly around the dinner table. So imagine 18 people sitting around answering this question together. And everybody has things from their past that they can relate to what others went through. And so that's an instant moment of connection to dive back into the past, to have the platform to share that story, and to be able to empathize with those around the dinner table.
Yeah.
It's been amazing.
And the fact that you do it around food, I think is marvelous. As I mentioned to you, I consider myself an Italian wannabe because the food there was just so, when you bring all the senses, when you think about reflecting on something this personal, and you bring all the senses, right? Touch, sight, hearing, taste,
yeah,
and the smell.
Yeah.
They say one of the things that brings back memories almost as fast as anything is smell. You bring in that.
Interesting.
And so that's why I love the Italian tradition of the sauce that simmers all day.
Yeah.
And you come into the home, and it's that welcoming. I had a friend. You'll love this. I had a friend talk to me because as a missionary, you're teaching lessons about Jesus and the gospel and so on. It was very enriching. He'd say, in Italy, it's different, Chester. He said, you'll be talking to somebody, and they will get a little faraway look in their eye, and ask him in that moment, "What are you thinking?"
Yeah.
And he says, "You know what they're thinking? What am I going to have for dinner?" So I love that you bring all the senses to bear on reflection.
There's actually carrots in the sauce, by the way.
I like it even more already.
This is amazing.
This is too much synergy.
My man.
This has been
pleasure.
Beyond delightful. Thank you so much, Chris.
Have a good one, folks.
Cheers.